Dean Halloway parked in the same spot at 4:40 every morning and turned his phone to offline. The 1/2 hour of the day he refused to make a dollar. Before anyone came out, he'd lean across and wipe the dust off the empty passenger seat. Nobody was going to sit there. He wiped it anyway. For 19 months, a coffee appeared on his hood, left there in the dark, never once mentioned. He'd driven the same night nurse 11 times. When his dispatcher asked why he blacked out the busiest half hour of the morning surge, he said only this: "Nobody's paying me to be here." That's the whole point. Then came the September morning. The hood was bare, rain pooling where the cup should have been, and the citation already tucked under his wiper. If you believe it's never too late for the heart, this story is for you. Before we go on, if stories like this one move you, subscribe and tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? I want to see how far this one travels. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. The parking lot behind Saguaro Vista Medical Center wakes up slow. Tucson doesn't do dawn in a hurry. At 4:40, the sky is still the color of an old bruise, and the desert cold sits low over the asphalt, and the tall sodium lights buzz like something tired. Bay 3 is the ambulance side. It's where the rigs back in. It's where the night shift comes out when their bodies are done. Dean Halloway backed his sedan into the far corner every single morning. Bumper against the low east wall. Same spot. Same angle. A silver Camry with 190,000 miles on it and a car note of $427 a month that came due whether he drove or not. He'd been driving 6 years. He knew the math the way you know a scar. The morning surge, 4:40 to 5:10, when the hospitals let out and the airport run started and the early shift people needed rides. That was the richest half hour of his day. $40? Easy, on a good morning. Sometimes more. And every morning, he reached up, touched the screen and turned it off. Offline, 35 minutes of nothing. On purpose. He'd sit there in the dark, with the engine ticking and the heater humming low, and he'd watch one door. The automatic doors on the ambulance bay side. The ones that hissed open when a body crossed the sensor. He wasn't waiting for a fare. His app was off. No fare could reach him even if it wanted to. He was waiting for her. Here's the thing you should know about that corner. Dean parked his bumper against the east wall of Saguaro Vista every day. He had for years. But he had not walked through those doors since 2019. Not once. He didn't go in for coffee. He didn't go in to use the restroom. When the monsoons came and the lot flooded, he stayed in the car. That building in him had an agreement. He kept to the lot. It kept its distance. There was a letter behind his sun visor, folded into thirds, the creases gone soft with handling. He touched it sometimes, in the dark, the way some men touch a wedding ring they don't wear anymore. 2 fingers, quick, and then back to the wheel. We won't get into what it said. Not yet. He wasn't ready, and neither are you. He wasn't the first car in that lot every morning. He was the only one that wasn't there for money. Her name was Marisol Reyes. 41 years old. 9 years of nights in the IQ on the 4th floor. 9 years. Think about that. 9 years of watching the sun come up on the drive home instead of on the way to work. 9 years of blackout curtains and a body clock that never once agreed with the world outside it. She hadn't slept properly in daylight in almost a decade. Her friends stopped inviting her to brunches. Her mother stopped understanding the schedule. She lived in the hours other people were unconscious for, and she was good at it. The best on her unit. Steady hands and a low, calm voice. And none of that followed her out into the dark lot at 5 in the morning. Because in the lot, all the steadiness left her. Dean had driven her 11 times. He knew things about her the way you learn things about a person you carry through the dark. She always sat behind him, never beside. She always said thank you twice, once when she got in, once when she got out. She held her keys splayed between her fingers before the car even stopped, and every single time, before she stepped out of the building, she paused. That was the thing he'd noticed first. Before he knew her name, before the coffee, before any of it. She'd come to the automatic doors, and they'd hiss open, and the cold and the dark would be waiting, and she'd stop. Just for a second. One breath, taken at the threshold, gathering herself to cross a parking lot. He knew that pause. He understood it better than she could have guessed. So this is where the real story starts. Not with the coffee, with the reason for the coffee. 19 months before that bare September hood, Marisol came off a code that had gone the wrong way. If you've never seen it, I'll tell you plainly. A code is when a heart stops, and a room full of people spend everything they have trying to start it again. Sometimes it works. That night it didn't. She'd pushed the meds. She'd counted the compressions. She'd watched the line go flat and stay flat. And then she'd charted it and washed her hands and walked out into Bay 3 at a little after 5 in the morning, swaying on her feet, hollowed all the way out. There was a silver sedan idling near the curb. She thought it was her ride. The app had said, "Silver Sedan." She was so tired the letters on her phone had stopped meaning anything. She opened the back door and got in and reached for the seatbelt. And that's when she realized it wasn't her car. There was a man in the driver's seat she didn't know, turning around, saying something, and the plate was wrong, and the whole world tilted. And she got out shaking so hard, she dropped her phone on the asphalt and left it there for a full minute because her hands wouldn't obey her. Nothing happened. That's the part people don't understand. Nothing happened to her. Wrong car, honest mistake. The man was probably as startled as she was. But something happened anyway. After that night, the lot had teeth. After that night, every idling car in the dark was a question she couldn't answer. Which one is mine? Which one is safe? Which shape in the dark is the right shape? Dean heard about it the way drivers hear things. A passenger mentioned it, weeks later, in the offhand way people mention someone else's fear. A nurse got in the wrong car. Poor thing was rattled. And Dean, who almost never spoke first, asked which lot. And she told him. Bay 3, at Saguaro Vista. Around 5. He didn't say anything else the rest of that ride. The next morning he was there at 4:40. Offline, waiting, he told his dispatcher it was because the hospital let out early sometimes, and he liked to catch it. That was a lie, and not even a good one, but nobody looked too hard. He parked in the corner where his headlights would fall across the doors. He turned the app off so no ping would pull him away in the middle, and he waited, taking no fares, in the exact window that used to earn him the most. The first few mornings, she came out and didn't see him at all. Or if she did, she saw one more car in a lot full of cars. He didn't wave. He didn't roll the window down and call out. A man calling out to a woman across a dark parking lot is the last thing on earth that would have helped. He just sat where the light was, engine running, a plain and ordinary and unmistakably occupied car, so that the corner nearest the doors was never empty and never a question. He figured that was all he could give, a shape in the dark she could learn to trust. It was week 3 when the coffee showed up. He didn't see it happen. That was the whole quiet miracle of it. He'd been watching the doors, and at some point he glanced forward, and there it was, sitting on the hood of his car. A paper cup. Ridged sides, the kind with the built-in grip, the kind they only had at the Saguaro stop. The 24-hour place, 2 blocks down. Steam long gone off it. Cold, probably, by the time he noticed. She'd set it there and walked away and gotten into someone else's ride, or her own car, or a bus, he never knew which, and she'd never said a word. He got out. He picked it up. He held it in both hands in the cold like it was something that might fly off. And then he did the thing that tells you everything about Dean Halloway. He didn't drink it. He set the empty cup on his dash, up by the windshield, and he left it there. A cold cup of coffee he never tasted, riding shotgun in the place he'd wiped clean that morning for nobody. She never mentioned it. Not that morning. Not the next time he drove her. Not ever. And he understood, somehow, that mentioning it would end it. So he didn't either. Two people saying thank you to each other in a language with no words in it. That's how it started. A cup on a hood, in the dark, between two people who decided, separately and without telling anyone, to show up. Here's what he figured out next, and it took him a while. The coffee wasn't always there. Some mornings the hood was bare, and he'd feel a small drop in his chest, and then he'd remind himself she was off. That was all. Nurses work 3 nights, and then they don't. And sure enough, the mornings the coffee came were the mornings she'd worked. The mornings it didn't come were her nights off. The cup was a calendar. Without a single word passing between them, he learned her schedule off the roof of his own car. And then it got finer than that. Because it wasn't always the same coffee. Some mornings it was black. He could tell she'd started writing on the lid, just tiny things, a B or nothing at all. And after a while, he understood the code without ever being taught it. Black. No sugar. On the mornings, the night had been quiet. 2 sugars on the mornings it hadn't. On the mornings after a code that went the wrong way, the mornings her hands had been full of somebody's failing heart, the coffee was sweet. 2 sugars, sometimes 3, like her body had decided it had earned it. So he could stand in the parking lot at 4:45, before he'd even seen her face, and know what kind of night she'd had. Bare hood, she's home, sleeping, good, black coffee, she worked, and it was a mercy of a shift. Sweet coffee, she worked, and somebody died, and she carried them out to the lot and set them down on his hood in the shape of 2 sugars. He started preparing for the sweet mornings. That was R3, though nobody called it that. And Dean would have laughed at the idea that a man sitting in a Camry was doing anything worth a name. On the mornings the coffee came sweet, he ran the heater a little longer, a little warmer, so the car would be a wall of warm air if she needed it. He wiped the passenger seat down every morning, but on the sweet mornings, he did it twice. And once, months in, on a bad, cold night, she'd gotten in and her phone had been dead, she'd texted no one, she'd needed to call her sister, and her battery was at nothing, and he'd handed back a charging cable without a word, and she'd plugged in and made the call in the back seat in Spanish, low and tired, and he'd kept his eyes on the road. After that, he kept a spare charger in the passenger door, just in case. Just for her. It lived there like it had always lived there. You have to understand, none of this cost nothing. I want to be honest about the money, because Dean was honest about it with himself, lying in bed doing arithmetic at 2 in the afternoon when he should have been asleep. $427, the car note, every month. The surge window he gave away, call it $40 a morning. Some mornings less, some mornings 60. Say he drove 5 mornings a week. Say he gave away $200 a week to sit in a dark lot with his app turned off. $800 a month. More than the car note. He was paying, out of his own thin pocket, more than the cost of the car itself, for the privilege of earning nothing in the one lot on earth he had every reason to avoid. He knew the number. He never let himself round it down. And still, every morning, 4:40, offline. Now let me tell you about the morning the whole thing got exposed. Because for a long time, it was invisible. A cup in a car, and 2 people in the dark. Nobody knew. And then one morning the machinery of the hospital failed out loud, and Dean's little private arrangement got dragged into the light in front of everyone. Saguaro Vista had a safety escort program. On paper, it was a good thing. A security officer was supposed to walk the night staff to their cars if they called the badge line. There was a number printed on the back of every ID badge in the building. You called it, and someone came, and you didn't cross Bay 3 alone. That's how it worked on paper. This particular morning, a float nurse, young, newer, out of her regular unit, came off shift shaken by something and did the exact right thing. She called the badge line. And it rang. And it rang. And it went to voicemail. A recorded voice thanking her for calling security and asking her to leave a message. At 5 in the morning, alone at the doors, she left a message for a machine. Then she stepped out into the lot because she couldn't stand in the doorway forever. And halfway across, a car she didn't recognize flicked its headlights on, and she froze. Just stopped, mid-stride, on the open asphalt, the way a rabbit stops. 19 months earlier, that had been Marisol. Tonight it was a stranger, but it was the same lot, and the same dark, and the same failure of everyone who was supposed to be there. And the person who was actually there was Dean. He saw her freeze. He didn't hesitate. He hit his flashers, hazard lights, both of them. That steady, friendly blink that says, "I'm here, I'm a car, I'm nothing to be afraid of." He rolled his window down. He kept his hands where she could see them on the wheel, and he called across the lot, in the calmest voice he had. "You okay? You waiting on a ride? I'm just parked. Take your time." A name and a face. Flashers on, window down. Not a shape in the dark anymore. A man saying an ordinary sentence in an ordinary voice, and the whole thing came unlocked. The nurse breathed. The headlights that had scared her belonged to a maintenance truck that rolled on past. She walked to her own car on legs that worked again. She waved at Dean, a small grateful wave, and drove off. And here's what made it land. There were witnesses. The doors had opened twice more in those few minutes. 2 other night staff had come out into the tail end of it, had seen the frozen nurse, had heard the badge line was ringing to voicemail again, had watched a rideshare driver in the corner do the job the hospital had promised to do, and hadn't. Bernie Cho was one of them. The night charge nurse, 55, arms crossed, seeing everything. She didn't say anything to Dean that morning, but she filed it away. She saw the mismatch clean, a building full of policies and lanyards and a printed number that rang to nobody, and one unpaid man in a Camry who was simply, reliably there. That should have been the whole story. The good part. The part where the quiet man gets seen. But the same morning, something else was watching, and it didn't see a good man at all. Saguaro Vista had switched security contractors that summer. Meridian Protective Services. New uniforms, new lanyards, new tablets. And Meridian ran the lots by the book. A book that had exactly 1 page about a silver Camry that showed up every morning at 4:40 and sat in the same corner for half an hour without ever going into the building. A Meridian officer walked Bay 3 that morning with a tablet, taking photos. And he stopped behind Dean's car, and he photographed the plate, and he typed into a little box on a screen. Loitering, Bay 3. Recurring, vehicle present daily. No hospital business, no patient, no visitor pass. Same man. Same corner, same half hour. To the frozen nurse and to Bernie Cho, that sameness was the safest thing in the lot. To Meridian, that sameness was a flag. The exact quality that made Marisol able to trust him. He's always there, same spot, same plate, was the exact quality the contractor logged as suspicious. Dean didn't see the officer take the picture. He was watching the doors. He was always watching the doors. The first citation came a few mornings later. He found it tucked under his wiper when he got out to check the hood. A slip of paper in a plastic sleeve, damp with the last of the night's cold. Meridian letterhead. A $50 fine. Unauthorized parking, ambulance access area. First notice. A little box checked. A signature that was really a stamp. $50. He stood there holding it, and he did the arithmetic he always did, because that's the kind of mind he had. $50 was a morning and a quarter of surge money he'd already given away. $50 on top of the $800 a month he was already not earning. $50 and the car note $427, and the citation said first notice, which meant there'd be a second, and probably a third. For the first time in 19 months, he thought about stopping. He sat in the car with the fine on the passenger seat, the seat he wiped clean every morning for nobody, and he thought, plainly, you could stop this. Turn the app on at 4:40 like every other driver. Take the fares. Make the $40 instead of paying to lose it. Nobody would blame you. Nobody even knows you're doing this. There's no one keeping score. She'd get out into the lot and find her ride like everyone else in the world finds their ride. And it would be fine. Probably. It would probably be fine. Probably. That was the word that stopped him. Probably fine. Let me say the thing out loud. The thing none of the paperwork could see. He wasn't waiting for a fare. He was going offline, at his own cost, in the lot where he'd lost everything. So one woman would never again have to guess which car in the dark was the right one. Meridian had a box for loitering. The hospital had a line item for the escort program that rang to voicemail. Nobody anywhere had a line item for that. There was no form. There was no code. There was no button in any app on earth for what Dean Halloway was actually doing. So he folded the citation into the glove box, and the next morning, he was back at 4:40, offline, in the same corner, $50 poorer, and not 1 inch moved. It was a few mornings after that when she left the sandwich. The coffee was there, on the hood, 2 sugars, a hard night. And beside it, that morning, was a second thing. A breakfast sandwich, wrapped in foil, still warm. Egg and green chile from the Saguaro stop, he'd find out later. He picked it up, and the warmth of it went straight through the foil into his cold hands. And he stood in the lot and didn't understand it for a second. And then he did. Because in 11 rides and 19 months, Marisol had noticed the thing nobody noticed. Dean never ate in the mornings. Every driver eats. A gas station burrito, a granola bar, something jammed in the console. Dean's console had a cold, empty coffee cup in it and nothing else. She'd been watching him the way he'd been watching her. All this time. The two of them keeping each other's small secrets. And she'd seen that the man who sat in the lot to make sure she was safe never once fed himself while he did it. So she fed him. He ate the sandwich in the parking lot as the sky went from bruise to gray. First warm food he'd had in that lot in 6 years. He didn't cry. I want to tell you he cried, but he didn't. Dean wasn't a crier. He was a folder of things into glove boxes. But he sat there a long time after it was gone. Now I have to tell you why the lot could hurt him. Because you've been waiting, and it's time, and you needed to understand everything that comes after. That building was where Dean's life ended the first time. He wasn't always a rideshare driver. For 17 years, Dean Halloway was a respiratory therapist. Licensed, good, one of the best on nights. The person they paged when a patient couldn't breathe, and the numbers were falling. He knew that ambulance bay the way you know your own hallway in the dark. He'd run through those automatic doors, the same doors he now watched from a parked car, 1,000 times, badge swinging, going toward the worst moment of a stranger's life to try and pull them back from it. That was his work. That was who he was. In 2019, a colleague was diverting medication. Stealing it is the plain word. And when the investigation came, the trail ran through an access badge. And the access badge that got named was Dean's. He hadn't done it. He knew he hadn't done it, and eventually, after months, after his license was suspended and his name was in a file, and every shift he'd ever worked got looked at sideways, eventually they figured out he hadn't done it either. He was cleared. Fully, formally, there was a letter. But cleared isn't the same as restored. The investigation cleared his name and closed his file, and then the machinery just stopped. The reinstatement never happened. The paperwork to give him back his license sat in some queue behind some other paperwork, and the hospital that cleared him never fought for him, and the state board never got around to it. And Dean, gutted, humiliated, cleared and ruined in the same breath, stopped pushing. He walked out of Saguaro Vista in the spring of 2019, and he did not walk back in. He put the letter behind the sun visor of his car. Exonerated, never restored. And he started driving strangers around the city for $4 a ride, and he parked his bumper against the east wall of the building that had been his whole life. Every single morning, close enough to touch it, and never once going in. That's the corner she pauses at the automatic doors. That's the threshold he wouldn't cross. He waited at the sight of his own undoing, flashers ready, heater running, offline, to make sure one person could cross the dark safely. He couldn't save his own life. He decided that a long time ago. But he could sit in the ruins of it and keep watch over hers. He touched the letter that morning, 2 fingers, after the sandwich. Then he put his hands back on the wheel. The morning it finally cracked open between them was the coldest one yet. Late in the season for it, but Tucson gets 1 or 2 mornings that bite. And this was one, frost feathering the windshield, his breath fogging inside the car. Marisol came out early. That was the first thing that was different. Usually the coffee came before she did. But this morning the doors hissed, and there she was with 2 cups in her hands. One for the hood, and one, he realized, still for herself. And she'd come out before she'd even set his down. She was moving stiff and slow, a long night in her shoulders. And Dean did the thing he had never once done in 19 months. He got out of the car. He came around, and he opened the passenger door. The seat he'd wiped clean that morning like every morning. And he stood there in the cold with the warm air spilling out past him. And he said the first full sentence he had ever said to her that wasn't a driver's sentence. "It's cold, Marisol. Sit while it warms up." He'd never used her name, not once out loud. She stood there with a coffee in each hand and looked at him, this man she'd been feeding in the dark for a year and a half. And something in her face moved. "Dean," she said. Just his name. She knew it. Of course she knew it. She'd been reading it off the app for 11 rides, and she'd never said it either. 2 names, in the cold, over the open door of a warm car. And she stepped in and set the second cup in the console. And he came around and got in his own side. And for the first time, they were 2 people sitting in one warm car in the dark instead of a driver and a fare. And the whole frozen lot around them went quiet. And neither one of them reached for the app. And neither one of them said what it was. She lifted her coffee. He lifted the one she'd handed him. In 19 months, he had never once drunk the coffee she left. This morning, in the warm car, with her sitting where he'd wiped the seat clean for nobody, he took the first sip. And behind them, in the corner of the lot neither of them was looking at, a Meridian officer stepped out of a white van, tablet glowing, and started walking toward the plate he'd already photographed twice. The knock came on the glass. 2 knuckles. Polite, almost. Marisol went still with the coffee halfway to her mouth. Dean rolled the window down. The cold poured back in like it had been waiting. The officer was young. Meridian on the chest, a lanyard, a tablet cradled like it mattered. He looked at Dean, then at Marisol, then at the 2 cups. "Sir, you've been logged in Bay 311 mornings running." He said it like a fact he'd rehearsed. "This is a restricted lot. Patient loading only." "I know what it is," Dean said. "Then you know you can't sit here." Marisol set her cup down in the console. "He's not sitting. He's my ride." The officer's eyes flicked to the dark app on the mount. Offline, no trip. No fare. He'd seen it before he asked. Dean watched him see it. "There's no active trip," the officer said. "No," Dean said. "There isn't." That was the whole trap, and both of them knew it. A ride with no ride. A driver getting paid nothing to be somewhere he'd been told to leave. The officer tapped his tablet. "First citation went out last week. $50. This is your warning on the second. Third one's not a fine." He looked up. "Third one's a trespass order. You get banned from the property. Every entrance. You understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand." "Then, I won't see you here tomorrow." He didn't wait for an answer. He walked back to the white van, and the van pulled out slow, and its taillights bled red across the wet asphalt and were gone. For a while, neither of them said anything. The heater ticked. Marisol looked at the console, at the old cold cup he still kept there. The first one, from a year and a half ago, the one he'd never thrown out. "You kept it," she said. "Yeah, why?" He didn't answer that one. Not yet. She didn't push. Night people know how to wait. She drank her coffee. He drank his. And when the sky went from black to the color of a bruise, she gathered herself to go inside, and she paused with her hand on the door. "You'll be here tomorrow," she said. It wasn't a question exactly. It was a thing she needed to be true. "I'll be here." She went in. He watched her badge through the doors. Then he turned the key and drove out to make the money he hadn't made yet. And the whole way down Speedway he thought about the word trespass, and how strange it was that they'd use it for a man who only ever wanted to belong somewhere. The rides changed after that, not the route, the talk. For 19 months they'd said driver things. "Watch your step. Buckle up. Cold enough for you." Now the 11 minutes between the hospital and her apartment on Fort Lowell became the only honest conversation in either of their lives. She told him about her father, Parkinson's, the slow kind, the pills he lined up in a plastic tray by color. How she called him on her lunch at 2 a.m, even though he was asleep, just to hear the machine say the number was still connected. He told her about his mother, the oxygen, the way he used to be the one who knew how to work the machine, and how nobody in the family believed he'd forgotten, because he hadn't. He just wasn't allowed to touch that kind of thing anymore. She caught that. The way he said aloud. Aloud by who? Long story. "I do nights," she said. "I've got nothing but long." But he only smiled at the windshield and let the exit take them, and the story stayed folded up wherever he kept it. She learned his rhythms. He learned hers. She started leaving the sandwich twice a week now, foil wrapped, egg and green chile from the Saguaro stop, because she'd figured out months ago that he never ate in the mornings and had decided, without telling him, that this would not stand. He learned to read the cups like scripture. Black meant a quiet night. 2 sugars meant somebody didn't make it. On the 2 sugar mornings he turned the heater up before she came out, and he said less, and he drove slower, and she noticed all of it and said nothing. Because being noticed like that was a thing she'd stopped expecting from the world. The monsoon was building the whole time. You could feel it stacking up over the Catalinas in the afternoons, gray towers of it, the air gone thick and metal tasting. Tucson holds its breath in July. Everybody waits for the sky to break. Bernie Cho found him before the sky did. Bernie was the charge nurse. 55, 30 of those years on nights, eyes that missed nothing. She'd clocked the same car in the same spot too many mornings, and one dawn she came out ahead of Marisol and walked straight up to his window. "You," she said, "you're the one who's always parked here." "Yes, ma'am, every morning." "Same spot. No trip on your little screen." She crossed her arms. "I've been doing this a long time." And a man who sits in a hospital lot for free is either lost or he's up to something, and you don't look lost. "I'm neither." "Then what are you?" Dean looked at her. He could have lied. It would have been easy. Instead, he said the truest small thing he had. "I'm making sure one of your nurses doesn't have to cross that lot in the dark wondering which car is safe." Bernie's arms came uncrossed. "Slow, Marisol," she said. "I didn't say a name. You didn't have to." Bernie looked back at the doors, then at him, and something in her recalculated. She'd been about to threaten to report him. He watched the threat leave her face. 19 months ago she got in the wrong car out here, Bernie said quietly. Came back inside shaking, couldn't chart for an hour. I sat with her. She studied him. You know about that. Only that had happened. Not from her. And you've been out here since about 3 weeks after. Bernie was quiet a long moment. Then she nodded once, the way charge nurses nod when they've made a decision that isn't in any policy. "There's a man works the interior lot," she said. "Fuentes, old guy, been here longer than the paint. If that Meridian outfit gives you trouble, you tell Fuentes I said you're all right. They already gave me trouble." "I heard." Her mouth went flat. "Escort program's supposed to walk my girls to their cars." You know how many times that's actually happened this year? She held up her hand, made a 0 with her fingers. That's how many. Voicemail, every time. And they want to run you off. She shook her head and walked back toward the doors, and over her shoulder she said, "Tell Fuentes." Fuentes turned out to be a small, stooped man in a hospital windbreaker who'd been waving cars through Bay 3 since before Meridian existed. When Dean found him the next morning and said Bernie's name, the old man just nodded like it settled the earth. "That new company," Fuentes said, and spat delicately to the side. "They got tablets. I got 40 years. You park where you park, mijo. Anybody bothers you, you point to me." For a few weeks it held. The corner was his. The coffee came. The sandwiches came. The talk in the car got deeper, and neither of them named the thing it was, though anybody watching would have named it in a second. Then the sky broke. It came on a Tuesday night. The monsoon that had been stacking up for weeks finally let go over the whole valley. Rain coming sideways, washes running brown, the kind of storm that shuts the airport and floods the underpasses. And that was the night the codes came. Dean didn't know any of it yet. He only knew the ritual. He was in Bay 3 at 4:40. Offline. The wipers going. The heater on. The passenger seat wiped clean out of a habit that had stopped needing a reason. He looked at the hood. Nothing. No cup. Just the rain, pooling in the low spot on the hood where the cup should have been, running off the edge in a thin bright thread under the lot lights. He told himself she was running late. Nurses run late. He waited. 4:45. Nothing. 4:50. Inside, though he couldn't see it, Marisol was on her second coat of the night. The first had come in at 3, a heart that wouldn't hold. They'd worked it 40 minutes and lost it. Then at 4:20, the room next door went bad, and she was in it, hands slick, counting compressions, and there was no version of that night where she walked out to a parking lot at 5. The covering float was a young nurse named Tessa Lund. Tessa was good. Tessa was also alone on the other side of the unit with 3 patients of her own, and she couldn't get free. And when Bernie asked her to run down and leave the coffee, Tessa said the truest thing she could, which was, I can't leave them. I'm sorry. I can't get down there till it settles." It didn't settle until 6:20. So the hood stayed bare. And Dean sat in the storm and watched the empty spot fill with rain, and something in his chest that had held steady for 19 months began, quietly, to come apart. Because he knew the code. Black, quiet, 2 sugars, a death. And nothing. Nothing wasn't in the code. Nothing had only ever meant she wasn't working. But he knew her schedule now, knew it cold, and she was working. She was in there. And the hood was empty, which meant it was bad enough that there was no hand free to carry a cup down a stairwell. He waited. 5:10 came and went, the end of his window, the time he was supposed to flip online and go make his $40, and he didn't touch the phone. 5:30. 5:45. The surge died on the app without him. The car note sat at $427, due Friday, and he let the money burn and did not move. At 5:52, the white van came through. He saw it in the mirror. He didn't turn around. The officer got out into the rain with the tablet under his jacket, and he came to the window, and Dean rolled it down before the man could knock. "Third time," the officer said. He had to raise his voice over the rain. "I told you. This one's the order." He slid a paper into a plastic sleeve and pressed it flat under the wiper, right over the empty spot where the cup should have been. "Trespass. Effective now. You're not permitted on Saguaro Vista property. Any entrance, you need to leave." Dean looked at the paper going dark, with rain against the glass. "There's a nurse inside," he said, "who is going to walk out into this lot in the dark, and she is going to look for a car that isn't the wrong one, and I am the car that isn't the wrong one. Sir, I'm not moving until I know she's out." The officer stood there in the rain, young and soaked, and holding a rule he suddenly didn't feel as big as he'd been told it was. Then he got back in the van and pulled away. and didn't come back. Maybe he called it in. Maybe he didn't. Dean never found out. At 6:04, Dean did the thing he had sworn for 6 years he would never do. He got out of the car. He left it in Bay 3 with the citation blackening under the wiper. And he walked, in the driving rain, across the lot he'd been banned from, toward the ambulance bay doors he had not crossed since 2019. The canopy. The wide automatic doors. The bay where he used to run in off a rig with a jump bag on his shoulder, back when he was somebody a hospital trusted with air and breath and the last thin margin of a person's life. He stood under the canopy where the rain couldn't reach him, dripping, 48 years old. Banned, offline, broke, and closer to that door than he'd let himself stand in 6 years. He wasn't going in. He knew he wasn't going in. He just needed to be close enough to be sure. Close enough that if she came out shaking, he'd be 10 steps away instead of 100. He stood there for 16 minutes. At 6:20 the doors opened and Marisol came out. She was hollowed. You could see the whole night on her, in the way she moved, stiff and slow and emptied. She had her keys in her fist and her eyes on the ground, and she was already bracing for the lot, for the dark, for the old climbing pulse. And then she looked up and saw him standing under the canopy, soaked to the skin right in front of the doors he had never once come near. She stopped. "You're not in the car," she said. "No, you crossed the lot." Yeah, she looked at him standing there in the place he'd told her, in 11 minutes of honest talk that he could never stand. She didn't know the whole of it, but she knew enough to know that whatever this was, it had cost him something no cup of coffee could pay back. There was no coffee, she said. Her voice cracked on it. We lost 2. I couldn't get down. I kept thinking, he's going to see the empty hood, he's going to think, I know what I thought. I'm sorry. Don't. He took a breath. Don't you dare be sorry, come on. Let me get you home. He walked her to the car. He opened her door. He didn't touch the citation under the wiper, just left it there, going to pulp in the rain. He got in his side and started the engine and turned the heat up for her without being asked, and they sat a second while the windows cleared. The rain was easing now, that fast Tucson way, the storm spending itself all at once and then just quitting. He didn't pull out. He reached up instead, to the visor over the wheel, and he brought down a piece of paper folded into thirds. Folded so many times over so many years the creases had gone soft as cloth. I've never shown this to anybody, he said. Not since the day I got it. He put it in her hands. She unfolded it careful, the way you handle something that might tear. She read it in the gray light. He watched her eyes move. It was from 2019. Saguaro Vista letterhead, though a different logo than they use now. It said in the flat language of these things that Dean Halloway, respiratory therapist, had been fully cleared of any involvement in the diversion of controlled substances, that the investigation had found no evidence against him, that he was exonerated of all wrongdoing. They cleared you, she said. They cleared me. He looked out at the wet lot. A colleague was pulling from the cabinets. My badge had access to that floor. For a while it looked like me. Took 9 months to prove it wasn't. And by the time they proved it, he stopped. The license was gone. The trust was gone. They cleared my name, and they never gave me back my job. Cleared isn't restored. Nobody tells you that. There's a piece of paper that says you're innocent, and there's no door that opens because of it. She looked at the letter, then at the visor. So you park against the wall of the place that did this to you. Every morning. Why? And there it was, the question she'd never pushed. He answered it now. Because you got in the wrong car once. In the dark. And it scared you so bad you freeze at those doors before you'll cross the lot. I've watched you do it. 19 months. He shook his head. The app doesn't have a button for what I'm actually doing. There's no fare for it. I turn the phone off, so there's no chance it pings me somewhere else. So there's no chance I'm not here. I turn it off so you never once have to wonder if the car in the dark is the right one. He looked at her. It's always the right one. That's all it was. That's the whole thing. She didn't cry. She was too far past crying that night. She just looked at him for a long moment. Then she folded the letter back up, slow, along the soft old creases, and she reached up and slid it back behind the visor into the exact place it had lived for 6 years, and pressed it flat with 2 fingers so it would stay. "It goes here," she said, "where you can touch it, not where you have to show it to be believed." And she brought her hand down and put it over his on the gear shift, and left it there, and neither of them said the word for what it was, because by then, they didn't need to. The next night, Bernie Cho brought it into the light. She did it in the break room, at shift change, with the whole night crew crowded in over their coffees. She laid 2 things on the table. One was a stack of printouts. The escort program's call logs, 19 months of them, every safety line ring that had gone to voicemail, every no-show, black and white. The other was a plastic sleeve with a rain-warped paper inside. The trespass citation peeled off Dean's windshield. "I want everybody to look at these," Bernie said. Both of them. At the same time, she tapped the logs. "This is our safety program. This is 19 months of it. Not one nurse walked to her car by a Meridian escort. Not one. It rings to a machine." She tapped the citation. And this is what that same company did to the one person who actually showed up. Every morning. For free. They banned him. The room was quiet. 2 codes the other night, Bernie went on. Storm of the year. Marisol couldn't get down to the lot. And that man sat in the rain for 100 minutes, bleeding money he doesn't have. And then he crossed a lot he'd been legally banned from, and stood in the ambulance bay, so she wouldn't come out into the dark alone. She looked around the room. "You want to tell me which one of these is the security risk?" Dr. Reuben Hale was standing in the doorway. Critical care. He'd been there in 2019. He remembered the whole ugly thing, the investigation, the clearance nobody acted on. "I know that name," Hale said. "Halloway, respiratory?" They cleared him and let him walk anyway. He came into the room. That was wrong then. It's been wrong for 6 years. He looked at Bernie's logs. Void the citations. All 3. And I want to talk to him. There's a re-entry bridge for licensed clinicians who were pulled without cause. It's slow, and it's paperwork, and I will personally walk it through committee. He shouldn't be driving strangers around at 4 in the morning. He should be on my unit. The citations were voided by the end of the week. Meridian never said sorry. Institutions don't. But the paper went away, and a work order went out to the facilities crew, and one morning there was fresh yellow paint in Bay 3, in the corner that had been his all along, and a small stenciled reservation that hadn't been there before. Tessa Lund found him first. She was the float who couldn't get down that night. She came out at dawn a few days later, and she'd clearly been carrying it. She walked up to his hood with a coffee in her hand, and she set it down, and she opened her mouth to say something, and couldn't. She'd done the math on what the empty hood had cost him. She just put her hand flat on the warm metal of the hood for a second, and nodded, and went to her car. Fuentes waved him into the painted spot with both arms like he was landing a plane, grinning his old gap-toothed grin. And Bernie, the last one out that morning, set a second cup down beside Tessa's. Black, no sugar. "A quiet night. That's from me," she said. "And it's not the last one." She looked at the 2 cups on his hood, steam rising off them into the cool. "The whole night crew knows your name now, Dean. You went from the man in the lot to the man in the lot." She smiled. Different sentence. Same words. The monsoon wore itself out through August, the way it always does. The storms coming further apart, and then not at all. The washes drying, the air losing its metal. And then it was September. The first cool morning came the way it comes to the desert, all at once. A night that finally holds its cold into the dawn, instead of giving it back. The kind of morning that tells you the long heat is finally, actually over. At 4:40, Bay 3 was empty. The corner spot with the fresh paint and the stenciled name sat open in the blue dark. No car against the east wall. No offline phone on a mount. No cold cup on a hood. Because Dean wasn't in the lot anymore. He was inside. Dr. Hale's bridge had gone through in August, slow and full of paperwork exactly like he'd promised, and Dean Halloway was a respiratory therapist again. Per diem to start. Nights, of course. Nights were where his life was. He wore the scrubs he thought he'd never wear again, and he carried an ID badge with his own face on it, the same building that had taken his name, giving it back. And he crossed the ambulance bay threshold every shift now like it was nothing, like it had never been the wall at the edge of his whole world. At 5:10, the doors opened. They came out together. Marisol in her coat, Dean beside her in his, off the same shift now, walking the same lot. He didn't have to sit in a car and watch her cross it anymore. He crossed it with her. She never once, not a single morning since, had to stand at those doors and count her breaths before she stepped into the dark. Because nobody crosses it alone now. The coffee still got made. But it got made in a kitchen, on a counter, in a pot that held enough for two, before either of them left the house. He drank his now. Every morning. No code needed, because the woman who used to write him messages in sugar just told him with her mouth how the night had gone. And one September morning, right around 4:40, a white van rolled slow through Bay 3. Meridian, tablet glowing on the dash. The officer scanned the lot for a plate to log, a loiterer to cite, a car parked where no car should be. The corner spot sat empty in the cool, freshly painted. A name stenciled on the asphalt. There was nothing to cite. There was nobody there. The man they'd banned had gone in through the front doors on a badge, and the van had no line item for that either. It idled a second in the empty bay, and then it drove on, and it found nothing. You should know there was another version of this. There was a version of Dean Halloway who kept sitting in that lot for the rest of his life, who never got out of the car, who never said her name, never showed the letter, never crossed the threshold. A good man, quietly waiting, behind a door he decided was locked forever. That man would have been enough of a story. Devotion is its own kind of ending. But that isn't the one that happened. He turned his phone off for 30 minutes every morning so that one tired woman could cross a parking lot without her heart climbing into her throat. That was all he set out to do. 30 offline minutes in a warm seat and a cup he never touched. It turned out to be the road back to his own life. If you're still here, still watching in the dark, somewhere the way night people do, comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one traveled.